Hello, and welcome to the third and what is likely the final season of Sunday Sweet Chats. This show was birthed from the release of my most recent chapbook in 2023, titled Artificial Sweetness from Finishing Line Press. But it also came out of a time when I was feeling rather isolated. Unfortunately, season three kind of finds me in a similar boat mentally, so I'm reaching out again. But instead of doing an all call, though, I took a risk. I reached out to some of my literary heroes and inspirations, and I was successful. We have a really stellar season ahead. We have literal icons in the poetry community and beyond, with so many accolades and backgrounds and wisdom and experience, and I can't wait to share their poems, stories, and wisdom with you all. If you don't know me, my name is Charles K. Carter. I'm a queer poet who currently lives in Oregon. I'm the author of several poetry collections, including most recently The God of Loneliness from Rebel Satori Press. But that's enough about me. Let's get to talking with our first sweet guest today and discuss some sweet, sweet poetry. Hello, James. I'm so excited to have you here today. Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Hi, Charles. It's great to be here. And I'm so honored to be with you and to be among so many amazing guests for this season. My name is James Cruz, and I live in Southern Vermont, basically in the woods, with my husband who works as a farmer here. I do not farm. I farm poetry. That's my harvest and other kinds of writing. And I've written a number of individual collections. I have edited, I think it's now five poetry anthologies, and really love bringing poetry to people who think they don't love poetry, who, may have not connected with poetry since grade school or high school or something like that. And just watching them light up as they rediscover that poetry is kind of still for all of us, that there's a lot of beautiful poetry that is accessible and relevant and honest and truthful that's being written right now. And I would include your poetry in that, Charles, as well, that people really need to read. And so I love gathering poems like that and bringing them to people in the forms of these little books.
Thank you so much, James. Yeah, the anthologies you have edited and put out in the world are really wonderful. Yeah, and I love that balance of they are accessible, but they're also really deep and like still have that literary merit too. So that balance of those things is really beautiful. And I really love that that's kind of your core there. When I was a high school English teacher, that was kind of my goal was to get kids to like look at poetry and not really feel so like about it, like see that there's something more to it. Um, Thank you so much again for being here. I actually wanted to share with you that a few months ago, when I got the pleasure to meet you and your husband, when you guys were, I think it was the day Love is for All of Us was officially released, your
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
event with it in Oregon on the coast. Um, that was such a special event for me. And actually, it was a very healing event, I thought. It was a really open venue. It was part of a Pride event, but a very diverse audience, and there was a lot of feedback from the audience, and a lot of people were shared and were very vulnerable. And um, I think I've been in a very low space in my own mental health. A lot of stressors, a lot of other things going on too. And I think that kind of reinvigorated me to kind of reconnect with um, not only my own work, but the poetry community too. So I really wanted to thank you for that. And that's why I really wanted to have you on first this season, because you're kind of to blame for me doing another season of this. So I'm kind of reconnecting with folks in this way. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, you're very welcome, and I'm really happy to be blamed for you doing another season of this wonderful show and inviting these guests and hopefully, creating these spaces that will help other people who might be struggling with their mental health right now. And I just want to say that if you're sensitive and aware and alive to the world, I think you have to be struggling to some degree just because it's really hard out there and in here right now. So, yeah, so thank you for what you're doing and just very honored to be here.
All right. Um, kind of hard to transition to this one, but since it's Sunday Sweet Chats, what is your favorite sweet treat or a favorite sweet treat of yours?
Well, my favorite sweet treat, one of many, would be Reese's Pieces because they bring me back to my childhood. And also, my mother, when she was still alive, she loved them with a passion. And so every chance I got, I would just, get online and send her like a jumbo bag of Reese's Pieces or something like that. So anytime I eat them now, or even just see them out in the store, I just think about her, think about my childhood, and it brings it all right back.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's enough about sweet food, though. Let's transition on into some sweet poetry. You got a poem to read for us today. Go for it.
I do, yeah. So this poem is from my book, Love is for All of Us, done with my husband. This was the book that you were talking about at the event, and yeah, I did write this poem from a place of grief and kind of needing some relief. I was struggling with depression at the time, and just was sitting out in the yard one day. That was sort of all I could do right at that moment. And it just occurred to me that, the world in these very, very subtle, soft ways was loving me back. And so this poem is called The World Loves You Back. Even if no one ever touched you with the tenderness you once needed, believe that the world's been holding you in its arms since the day you were born. You are not an accident or afterthought. Let rain on the roof remind you. Let sun on the skin or the neon orange of a Mexican sunflower at which a hummingbird pauses to drink. There are so many ways to hold and be held, and you could spend your whole life tallying them up without ever reaching the end of the list.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that one. That is one of my personal favorites from
Oh,
that rating you had done and the collection. I think it is the title just gets me. I mean, when you introduced it and just that title, I think it's just an important reminder. Yeah.
mm.
I know I
Yeah,
should.
and I was
Okay.
just going to say I don't want to suggest that it's like you can just walk outside and like, oh, feel that all the time. But, if you really kind of sit still and pay attention, especially getting in touch with the natural world, I think, that does open the door for the world to love us, even if it's just like a squirrel scurrying up to you or, one of those hummingbirds at the Mexican sunflower, whatever it might be. There are some soft and really subtle ways that I think we can be reminded that we're natural, that we're a part of this world, and that no one can ever really take that away from us.
I love that. It's so beautiful. Um, so what's going on in your world? What do you want to, is that the project you want to talk about today?
Sure. Actually, I love this project, but my husband Brad and I have been around the country kind of talking about it. So I'm not talked out, I'm not saying that, but I think maybe because I was just talking about my mom. Um, One of the projects that's coming up for me that I want to mention is I have a book that is sort of around grief that's coming out. That's about losing her, and I lost my dad about 25 years ago. He died when he was pretty young. And so the book is called Turning Toward Grief. And it was such a hard book to write. And then, the thing about being a writer is you don't just write something once and then it's like, oh, okay, great, that's done. I mean, you could, I guess, but if you want to share it, you're probably going to go back and revise it, and more than a few times. And every time I went back to these poems and reflections that make up the book, I realized I was like re-entering my grief and almost like re-traumatizing myself in a way. And and so, of course, like Luckily I have a good therapist. And so I brought it to her and I'm like, I have a deadline for this book. And, I just kind of hit this wall where I'm like, I don't want to work on this anymore. I really don't want to do this. And and so she said, well, this is one idea is to just set a timer and 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever you feel like you can handle, 15 minutes, whatever. And she said, you've always said that you can work in these little small ways and pay deep attention for that 20 minutes or whatever it is. And then when the timer goes off, if it feels right, to just get up and let it go. And and then take a walk, make a cup of tea, text or call a friend, like do something sweet for yourself. Those were her words, actually. And so I really obey this advice. I don't always listen to my therapist's advice, unfortunately. But luckily for me, and I guess my publisher, I listened to this advice and it was really profound. And so I guess I'm feeling called to share that in case anyone else is out there working on a creative project or, wanting to find some outlet for grief or despair or trauma and feeling like, I don't want to go back to that. And it's, first of all, you don't have to, but I think if you feel that nudge to go back and create something that can help you to transform your own pain, just doing it in these little increments was really, really helpful for me. And what ended up happening actually was I discovered that in the midst of reading through these poems and being with them in these shorter time periods, I found joy in the process. I felt really purposeful, like, oh, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for other people who might benefit. I was finding that I was finding enjoyment in it, but I was really doing it for other people too. And so that just changed my whole creative process. And I invite anyone, steal that, please. If that works for you or if that speaks to you, if you're struggling with a project. And I'm really proud now of the book that came because it feels like I was able to give my really close attention to it, but it didn't mean that, because basically I was still in grief while I was working on it. I'm not sure that
Mhm.
was like the smartest thing in the world, but, um, I was able to give my attention for these shorter time periods, which I think is often the case when we're struggling in any mental health way. Like we have this much energy to give and then that's that. And we can beat ourselves up about it and feel really guilty or be like, well, if I can give it 25 or 30 minutes a day, there are 30 days in a month, there are 365 days in a year. And after a while, that really adds up. And I might find I have energy for another 15 or 20 minutes, but maybe not. And I'm always looking for ways in my own creative slash spiritual practice. I don't really know the difference anymore. It's just all of a piece. But I'm always looking for more ways to be gentle and kind to myself because I have a really strong internal critic. And I think that probably comes of growing up queer in America and especially rural America, where I grew up in the middle of the country in rural Missouri. There was always this voice like, not enough, not good enough, not masculine enough, not normal enough. And I think that has become really internalized. And so I hear that still. It's gotten fainter and fainter over the years, luckily. But I hear that still as I'm working on new projects. And this was kind of a new, you know, bearing my soul, being really
Mhm.
personal project, putting that out there. So I'm not sure why I felt called to share that with you, but I think in part because you were being so vulnerable in the beginning of this episode. And, that just opened the door for me to do that as well. And that's how it happens in life and creative work, right?
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that and those tips and what's worked for you. And Yeah, those voices are very real inside our head and can be very overwhelming. Um, I share like the story of the tattoo on my wrist, worthy. I mean,
Mm,
that comes from the voice in my head, which largely from my abusive parent telling me I'm
mm,
worthless a lot. But I mean, that internal critic is there and has become my own voice. So
yeah.
that's a reminder of myself, no, you are worthy. And there's a period too, like period. There's no like
Yeah.
once you're productive enough or weigh this or look like that. Like it's no, you're worthy, period, now. Like um, yeah, however we
Yeah.
combat those voices and yeah, work through it. Yeah. And being gentle. And being gentle and with yourself and others seems to be extra hard these days.
Mhm.
Because it seems like the world wants to harden us.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I really do. I think there are forces at work. Well, I know there are forces at work that are trying to divide people and keep people apart and really harm us emotionally, mentally, so that we're more easily controlled. I mean, I really believe that that's what's happening in our world. And I guess, that's what I feel like I'm being called to do just through the lens of writing and poetry is to constantly push back against that desire to divide and, conquer in a way, and to say, no, no, there is still kindness in the world. There's still reasons for wonder and awe, gratitude and hope. And, I'm just looking at the the recent book behind you. And by the way, love is for all of us. It's not, you can't say that, um, first of all, that there's only this kind of God or that God only loves this kind of person. No, 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 no. Love is for all of us. And by the way, I'm going to go through and find all of these diverse voices who prove that love is for all of us. So that's really what that anthology was all about. You're making me think that I'm really kind of stubborn, actually. Like I come across with my calm, soft voice as being really gentle, like Teddy Roosevelt, speak softly and carry a big stick. It feels like that's sort of my goal with my own personal writing, my own work, and also the anthologies that I put together. Like, they look pretty, they look gentle or celebratory, but the idea, I think, is kind of radical, especially in these times um, that there is still tenderness, that there are still ways that we can feel like we belong to ourselves and to each other. And I just love that you're enough of a wordsmith that, and you know yourself well enough probably that you're like, okay, I'm not just going to tattoo worthy on my wrist, it's worthy, period. Because I know I'll try to add something else to that. And that is the culture that we live in too, that we're always trying to add something extra to earn our worthiness, to earn our sense of belonging. And I think my message, especially lately in my work, is like, you exist, therefore you belong, and you are worthy of love.
Hmm.
That's full stop for me.
Okay. I'm just going to throw this out there for folks who are listening. Laziness Does Not Exist by Devon Price and Rest is Resistance, and I can't remember the author. Those are two great books. I can probably put them in the links in the YouTube comments. Those are two great books that kind of wrestle with these ideas and really with our kind of American culture on where we've kind of built into this, productivity as our worth and how we can kind of gently push back with that and kind of balance that with our own selves and be gentler and more loving with ourselves and others. Because I
That's
think that
right.
is
Well, the others
valid.
are sometimes a challenge.
Yeah. But it starts with
Yeah,
ourselves, right? Like how we love and care for ourselves. Um, but that's also not isolated too, which I found to be really interesting in my own mental health journey, is because a lot of times it seems like mental health, especially in the medical model, like if you just see a therapist, like it's just like an isolated thing. Like you do that one-on-one with your therapist, but it happens in community. It happens with your support systems, whether that, I mean, whoever that is, whoever you work with, live with, your family, whoever you're around, like those relationships heal you, and how
mhm,
you interact in those relationships. Like that is part of it. We are whether we like it or not. We are social animals. We need each other. So both are equally important. We have to love ourselves, but then we also have to be able to love within our community too.
Hmm. I love that you're saying that, Charles, because I couldn't agree more. I mean, I really think, especially now, we're just all maybe rediscovering, in the post-COVID years that, oh, yeah, we tried to go it alone. We were isolated for so long. And maybe, like myself, other people fell into those habits of isolation because it was comfortable. Maybe it provided an initial refuge from anxiety, but it's not sustainable in the long run. And you realize you need other people to heal. Like, I would have happily stayed more isolated and single in a way because being married to someone has like just shone a light on everything I never wanted to shine a light on, you know? And so like I feel like I have a healthy marriage with my husband Brad, and you met him and heard from him, but it's taken so much work over the years, and we've had to do that together, and then had to do that in community with other people, with our own families, friends, coworkers, and it just goes on and on. But I really think that when we gather in the name of larger things, just like the event that you were talking about where you and I first met, we were gathering in the name of pride and in the name of love. And when we gather in the name of these larger things, I think we find this sort of sweetness and safety and even I'll say bravery that we forgot were already within ourselves, but needed other people to unlock it, because we look toward other people to be our examples. Like, you were vulnerable in the beginning, which was like, I was able to throw my plan out the window and just say, oh, actually, I want to talk about this other project. So you just gave me permission. And I think that is always what happens. And so we meet someone we're all at different places on the path, and there's no right or wrong, better or worse, and so we just lift each other up. And, I have seen it happen over and over again in online groups that I lead. I was just leading a retreat with my dear friend Rosemary Watola Tromer this weekend. And, it was 32 other people, and they were just lifting each other up and encouraging each other to share their work and, clapping for each other. And by the end, I may just burst into tears at any point, by the way. But by the end, people were saying to each other, I found a new family, and that's such a beautiful thing. I think we do find a new family when we are brave and vulnerable enough to share ourselves with the world, which is exactly what you're doing
Mhm.
here for us, Charles, and for yourself. And so, these ripples get created every time I share a poem, every time I publish a new book. And I do my best to remember that it's not about numbers. It's not about how many people buy it or like it or share it or whatever it might be, however we measure our worth. And it's really about touching individual lives. And so that's why it means so much to me to hear that, my poem and our event touched you so much. And I know that night that you were not the only one because other people were sharing really vulnerably and talking about that. So, we're very lucky to be doing what we're doing. And I think, anyone can do some version of this, whatever your version of this is, to just gather people together in the name of something larger and, see what happens.
Yeah. Um, that kind of leads really well into my final question for you. So in a world that can seem very overwhelming and negative and chaotic and salty, what keeps you on a personal level grounded and sweet?
Hmm. Well, practically, lots of meditation, quiet time, and I don't practice any sort of like formal meditation, I just do like simple noticing my breath, just being still. Sometimes I lie in bed and do it, like both hands on my heart and just lie still and be quiet, eyes closed. So I've been doing that as much as I can, but it's ironic, right? When we're struggling, we don't want to do the things that are the best for us. And so I have to remember that. And then really walking in nature, like I said earlier, just being out in nature is really grounding. And I'm also, just to build on what we were saying earlier, I'm just realizing how, like you said, the people that I surround myself with make all the difference in the world. So, whether it was the friend that I taught with this weekend, leading this retreat together and also, carrying all this food in for it and doing the cleanup, like it was pure pleasure because I was doing it with a friend and doing it with other people that I care about. And so just remembering that even though I was raised to just like, put your head down, keep going, do it, you can do it on your own. You don't need anybody else. I'm realizing more and more that what keeps me grounded and what keeps me sweet and connected and aware is letting other people in, letting them into my life, my world, and not being afraid to enter theirs with them when they might be struggling or when they might need a listening ear or something like that. So it's just this, it's a really sacred exchange, I think, that we do for each other when we're there. And it can even be just showing up and being silly together and just laughing and, not talking about any of the many, many serious things that I'm sure we all have to talk about in these times and to just release some of that energy that really helps me so much because I can be a really serious, rigid person. And so, just to loosen up and laugh at silly stuff and watch, really bad TV and just really like a lot of permission, I think is what I'm getting at here.
Love that. Thank you so much for having this sacred exchange with me and with the people who are going to watch this. It's very meaningful.
It's a pure pleasure, Charles. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here today, James. It's been such a sweet treat to have you as our first guest of the season.
It's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Sunday Sweet Chats. Catch another episode next Sunday. Bye.